Who the hell is going to main event UFC 300? Stick around to the end of the video to hear my prediction for the UFC 300 main event. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. All right, guys, so it looks like we are incredibly close to finding out what the UFC 300 main event is going to be. And I have a few ideas as to what it potentially is going to be, but there's a lot that goes into this because many people are predicting Alex Pereira being involved with the main event. And there's also people floating around Izzy versus Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira versus Tom Aspinall at heavyweight has been talked about. But something to keep in mind off the bat is that UFC 301, the month after UFC 300, is going to be in Brazil. And so I think that pretty much takes off the possibility of Alex Pereira being the UFC 300 main event. With UFC 301 being in Brazil, that tells me that we're probably going to see Alex Pereira in the main event and Pantoja defending his belt in the co-main event. Two Brazilian fighters, they're going to put them on home turf, sell tickets. It just makes sense. In my opinion, with Alex Pereira being taken off of UFC 300 and saved for 301 in Brazil, that leaves probably 2 or 3 options for the UFC 300 main event. The first option many people have talked about is Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. There's plenty of heat going into this one. It's an unfinished storyline going back to Dricus du Plessis and Izzy's confrontation in the cage at UFC 290 back in July after DDP beat Rob Whittaker. It's just a big fight. The battle for Africa that they've kind of created. I could see that being the UFC 300 main event, especially with Dricus as the champ, Izzy coming in as a huge star, looking to make a comeback after a really disappointing performance against Sean Strickland at UFC 293. I think that right now, this is an incredibly likely choice for the UFC 300 main event, but Izzy has said that it's going to be some time before he comes back, and I believe he said that he was nursing an injury and wasn't going to be full-time training again until February. Now, that would be a short timeline for him to go from not training at all to in a fight at UFC 300, about 8 weeks apart. And he has been posting himself in the gym to some degree with Eugene Behrman. So potentially, Izzy is getting ready for a UFC 300 main event. I would have said that Izzy versus Alex Pereira at light heavyweight was a possibility at UFC 300. But for the reasons I just said about 301, I highly, highly doubt Alex Pereira is going to fight on 300. Aside from that possibility, I think that we're inching towards an announcement that involves Conor McGregor at UFC 300. We've been told that it's going to be Michael Chandler for a long time now, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they could drop a total bomb on us, and it would be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3 at UFC 300, which I would rather see over Conor versus Michael Chandler. But there's a few things that go into that. Chandler's been promised this fight. What do they do with that? I believe that their Ultimate Fighter contracts include them fighting each other. Nate Diaz is not under UFC contract right now. So what does it look like from a testing pool standpoint? I know that USADA is off the table for the UFC now, and the UFC can kind of do whatever they want. But there still might be some complications in regards to drug testing and getting into the testing pool to get Nate Diaz onto 300. Conor has been training. He's been posting sparring videos, even if it looks like it's against his personal chef or security guard or something. But he has been training and beating up on some really not so good looking sparring partners. And so that tells me that he's at least in fight mode, because all that we've seen up until now has been him lifting weights on a yacht. So it is encouraging to see him in a gym with training partners, as bad as they look. I'm interested to see what would happen if maybe they pay Michael Chandler to step aside and then be the next fight after Nate if this happens. And another thing to consider is that there's been talks of Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal in boxing sometime in April or May, but that could have also just been a false report. Maybe it's a way of getting them licensed in Nevada to be able to fight in April on 300, because Jorge Masvidal has also said that he's unretired. So there is a lot going on here. I'm not really sure which way they're going to go, but my prediction is that it's going to be Conor McGregor in the UFC 300 main event, most likely against Michael Chandler, but I really hope that it would be against Nate Diaz. That would be an awesome top to the card. And it really does make sense because Conor would obviously not be a title fight, even though he would be the main event. And given that the other two title fights on UFC 300 are a women's title fight and the BMF title fight, it actually does make sense for Conor to go above those. If it was Alex Pereira or Leon versus Bilal, I don't see Conor going in a main event with that type of title fight on the card. But with a women's title fight and the BMF title fight on the card, I could definitely see Conor in the main event. So let me know what you guys think. Who do you want to see in the UFC 300 main event? Is it going to be Conor versus Nate? Let me know your thoughts. If you like this video and you want more content just like this, click that subscribe button down below. If you want more content from me, go check out my weekly comedy podcast, the Hissyfit podcast, and go check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World. Go watch this suggested video, and I'll see you next time.